we are having the second panel discussion of the conference with the title of Diplomacy Betrayed, the case of US-Israeli aggression on Iran. You know, in June 13th this year, Iran faced a very unprovoked and immoral war with so many geopolitical consequences in global and regional level. It was not only aggression against Iran, but also aggression on very principles of international law, on sovereignty, territorial integrity, prohibiting the use of force, and clear violation of the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Facilities and Nuclear Sites. On the geopolitical and legal implications of the war, there have been so many discussions, writings, and different analysis. But here we are going to hear from our distinguished panelists about their implications and their analysis about their view on Iran, the aggression against Iran. And I think it would be nice to have a very good gathering from the region and outside the region to have their views. On my left, I have Dr. Esmaeil Baghaie, who is a spokesman of the Foreign Ministry. At the same time, he's been studying and then teaching international law in some prominent Iranian universities. And for years, he's been working on legal frameworks. Then we have Mr. Mohammad Amersi, founder and chairman of Amersi Foundation. We will have Eldar Mamedov, who will join us soon. And then His Excellency Hassan Khalil from Lebanon as a member of the parliament. We have Dr. Abbood, who is teaching in Al-Araqiya University in Baghdad. And then Dr. Naser Hadian, who is a distinguished professor in Tehran University, working in the field of international relations and political sciences. As the first question, I will, Dr. Baghaie, as a member of the negotiating team of Iran during the course of negotiations during those 2 months leading to the aggression, this is a very important question, I think, in the whole international community, that what exactly happened during the course of those 2 months? Was it a deception from the beginning, or was it a kind of betrayal to diplomacy afterward by Israelis, and they take the US inside this trap? So this is two narratives inside Iran. This is the first question. What exactly happened during the course of those negotiations? And what was it, was a deal within reach at the end of that 2 months? Over to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, and my deep appreciation and thanks to all of you for taking the time to be present at this seminar. The simple answer to this question is that yes, we were negotiating. We were going to have the 6th round of negotiations. Just 2 days before that, Iran came under an egregious act of aggression. This is the fact. There could be different analysis of why and how it happened, but the fact of the matter is that Iran started this engagement with all good faith, with the very purpose of the negotiations to be resolving the dispute that, of course, we believed from day one that it was not a real difference, it was not a real dispute. It was concocted by the Israeli regime to smoke screens its behavior in the region. But still, since that was a dispute imposed on Iran, we went to the negotiation with all good faith to resolve it. And we could see some evidence, some clues that the United States was not serious. One reason was that they started these negotiations and then continued every 10 days, every week, 2-3 hours. But still, we had to do it because we could not predict, we could not say from day one that these negotiations would go nowhere. So what we did was very professional. We were instructed by our officials, by our people, to go to these negotiations and try to resolve this issue through peaceful means. What they did was not a simple act of use of force. It was far beyond that. We have two important principles that are regarded as fundamental tenets of contemporary international law: the prohibition of the use of force and the state's obligation to use peaceful means to settle international disputes. By using force against Iran, they betrayed both principles. They used force against Iran without any provocation, without any reason. And I think one more important point is that the way they tried to argue, tried to justify this use of force was all the more appalling. They invoked preemptive self-defense, something that has no place under international law. They also tried, I'm referring to Americans, they tried to justify this use of force on their collective self-defense. Why they intervened at the last days of this 12-day period was that they claim was to help Israel in its collective self-defense. Again, this has no place under international law. You may say that there has been many cases of use of force against other sovereign states, and this case is also one more example. It is disgusting, it is appalling, it is unlawful, but this is one of many cases of use of force. In the clip, we said they said that right now there are tens of conflicts going on around the globe. But I think this one was unique in the sense that we were negotiating. We were attacked while we were negotiating in good faith. And I think that's why we say that that attack was truly a betrayal of diplomacy, because it not only violated the principle of non-use of force under Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN, it also jeopardized the principle that obliges member states to use peaceful means for settlement of their disputes. And in a way, it cost hugely for the whole international community that you can no more trust any negotiating process because anytime you may come under an attack. So to put it in a nutshell, I think based on facts, since we came under an attack while we were engaged in a negotiating process, it should be truly regarded as a betrayal of diplomacy. And by saying that, we are not simply saying something rhetorical. We are telling our audience that it was a blatant act of lawlessness that has broad impacts on the whole international community. By using force in that situation, they establish a pattern, and that pattern could be replicated everywhere, every time. You can see that they are threatening, for instance, Nigeria. They are threatening many states in Latin America and Caribbean region. And I think it's part of a very dangerous trend that is eroding the whole fabric of international law and the UN system that has been working for the past 8 decades.
Thank you, Dr. Baghaie. In fact, you are referring to those very important principles, Article 51 and Article 2 of the UN Charter. And it is very unfortunate that some big powers now have turned to be revisionists in the international system to manipulate those very principles of the UN Charter to justify preemptive and extraterritorial use of force. Mohammad, you are living in the West, and you are in contact with the US European officials. How does this issue is perceived inside Europe and the US? I mean, what is their thinking? Based on their thinking, what exactly they were pursuing with this aggression against Iran?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me here. I think I will build on the very excellent response from my colleague here. So I think we have to distinguish here between what one might call the legal justification for doing what they've done and what the ulterior motive was behind what they did. So obviously under Article 2 of the UN Charter, use of force is only permitted if somebody is attacked or it is in self-defense. There is no other way that you can use force. And the way that the Americans and the Israelis have justified this to the UN is to invoke Article 51 to say that they were acting because they believed that a threat from Iran was imminent, and they were acting in a way to preempt, and all of this. But there is absolutely no evidence that they furnished to the UN that Iran was really ready to attack any of the US bases in the Middle East, or indeed attack Israel in any form or shape. Once this argument was lost, then the next argument was, well, Iran arms proxies in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iraq, and those proxies are in fact an extension of Iran, and hence, in order to neutralize these proxies, we are going to have to take this step. But that was not the real agenda. The real agenda in the West was that they saw an Iran very weakened after what happened in Lebanon with Hezbollah, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, and the degradation of Hamas in Palestine. So Israel, the West, and I mean the European powers as well as the United States, they all saw a weakened Iran. And in this pretext, they said, we have to really quickly achieve two things. We have to attack Iran in a way that stems completely their ability to develop a nuclear bomb and to become a nuclear threat to the West, because now is our chance. We have justification. Their ability to hit back will be extremely limited. The front line with the proxies is almost gone. So this was one, and the other reason that they had was really to try to precipitate regime change in Iran. So these were really the two most important underlying motives, but clearly they could not present them as such. Now let's analyze what happened and see that on both of those motivations, elimination of the nuclear program and regime change, largely it is recognized that the Western initiative, and I call this broadly Western initiative, has largely failed. On regime change, it never happened. It was never likely to happen if they had been well advised by people who were more experienced in understanding Iran, but they relied on some dissidents sitting in Washington, a few people sitting in Europe, in Israel, that this was very much on the cards. If anything, it brought the Iranian people close together, unite under the flag, and say, we are not a neighboring state like Syria or Lebanon or Iraq, where Israel can wake up any one morning and say, okay, let's go and bomb them now because we haven't been there for a while. This is not Iran, and this will never be Iran. So regime change is recognized as one aim that completely failed. The elimination of the nuclear program is more nuanced because, as you know, they attacked hard Fordo, they attacked hard Esfahan, but they left Bushehr alone, largely because that was a joint venture with Russia. And they understood that antagonizing Russia will become a huge political mess, so they tried to degrade whatever they could degrade. But these steps have not resulted in the complete collapse of the Iranian nuclear regime. Iran very cleverly decided to stay in the NPT and has not abandoned the NPT as yet, although it is within its rights to do. Iran was developing nuclear power for civilian use, and an attack on these nuclear facilities was also a direct violation of the IEA and the NPT. In response, Iran presented a very strong letter from Ambassador Iravani to the UN Security Council. Unfortunately, because of the veto system at the UNSC, of course, the United States, the UK, and France were going to veto any action. And so far, to the best of my knowledge, the Iranian government has not applied to the UN General Assembly because there is a mechanism called Uniting for Peace, which is a very powerful mechanism that Iran can invoke to say to the General Assembly that we got nowhere with the UNSC and we would like the GA to now look at this issue and then work with the International Court of Justice, work with the experts in the UN system to hold this out and to say this will not happen. And my final point is that this has set a very dangerous precedent. Look at what the United States is now doing in Venezuela. What has Venezuela attacked the United States in any way? No. The justification is that Venezuela is a narco-terrorist state and is fighting the United States with drugs. This is not justification under Article 2 of the UN Charter for the US to go and attack Venezuela. Now, is this going to give a license for China to go and attack Taiwan on the basis that Taiwan and the West were plotting to harm China? So it opens a Pandora's box, and it's going to be very, very difficult to shut this Pandora's box. And so this precedent, sadly, has left the world in a very dangerous place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammad. You brought so many important and thoughtful issues to the table, and I think we can discuss it later more. Coming to you, Eldar, welcome.
Thank you.
You have been working for years with the European Parliament, European parliamentarians, and then you have been an active member of Pugwash, working on nuclear non-proliferation issues. You know, Iran, especially after the war, the course of events which led to the war, exactly a day before the war, IAEA had adopted a resolution on June 12th, which is perceived inside Iran as a context, providing a context for the war later. Then the impartiality and functionality of the IAEA was questioned in several cases inside Iran. How do you see the issue from the IAEA perspective? What is the expectation from the IAEA? And As was mentioned several times by the IAEA General Director, that Iran was not pursuing a weaponized nuclear program. What is your opinion about the IAEA role in easing the situation?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize for coming late because I was in the briefing with Minister Arakci, so I hope you excuse me. Concerning the question that was asked, I think there is widespread disappointment here in this country, and I can understand that, about the actions of IAEA, in particular the failure of the General Secretary to condemn the attacks by Israel and the United States in June. That was probably the minimum that could have been expected from that body. Now we also see that just actually a few days ago, the E3 and the United States tabled a resolution to the Board of Governors of the IAEA, which actually also continues in this narrative of denial, as if nothing has happened in June. It's business as usual. Iran has to deliver this and that, and to be held accountable for its claimed and alleged violations of its obligations. And it is clear why E3 and the United States are pushing for that resolution. It's because they are really very eager, very interested to know what's happening with this highly enriched uranium in Iran, up to 60%. But what is lacking here is any reciprocity. So the way people in Iran see it, and I can understand that, is that Iran is asked, and there is demand for Iran to cooperate, to be transparent, to be accountable. But what is the reciprocity? What is the benefit for Iran to be forthcoming? The debate in this country, as I could see and follow, is becoming quite polarized when it comes to NPT, for example. And the question of exit from NPT is no longer entirely a theoretical question. I do not imply that that decision to quit NPT is imminent, but no one can deny, no one can ignore that the public opinion in this country, and part of political sphere as well, is gearing towards conclusion that Iran's participation in NPT not only failed to safeguard its interests, but in fact put it directly in danger by limiting Iran's deterrence capabilities. So this is a debate that is taking place here. As far as I can see, it is something that has to be taken very seriously by international players, and I think that the fact that what we've heard this morning from Minister Arakci, that this government is still open to dialogue and to search of diplomatic solution. This is something that absolutely has to be taken advantage of by E3, by the United States, by all the international players, because we cannot forget that Iran, just like Western countries, also has politics. And the governments and the politicians, they're accountable to their people and to the public opinion. And if the public opinion in Iran sees that there is no benefit in adhering to international norms, including cooperation with IAEA, then what argument would the government have to continue that cooperation and to continue showing its willingness to pursue diplomatic solutions? So I think the conclusion should be that it's time to move past the confrontational model of relationship, or rather non-relationship, between the West and Iran. It's time to get realistic about what is achievable. Iran has made very clear many times that zero enrichment is not an option, and in fact, the experience of JCPOA has showed that the West and the international community can live with certain level of uranium enrichment, provided it's under international control. So this is the only model that has proved to be viable, and I see no other option than to go back to that. Shouldn't be necessarily exactly the JCPOA, but the whole philosophy should be the same: control of nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Eldar. Excellency, Dr. Khalil, you are coming from a country who has been repeatedly, for years, under aggression by Israel. And as a very experienced politician, you have been dealing with this issue for years, I'm sure. One of the consequences of the Israeli aggression against Iran and what is happening in the wider region is to securitization and militarization of the region even more than before. How do you see these consequences impacting the wider region, including Lebanon?
أنا شكرا بداية أود التأكيد أننا أمام واقع دولي جديد. كل النظام المرتبط بالقانون الدولي الذي تم قيامه بعد الحرب العالمية الثانية قد انهار، وانهار بالفعل. اليوم المرجعية المعيارية للمادة الثانية من ميثاق الأمم المتحدة قد سقطت بشكل أو بآخر أو تحولت. الدليل الذي نعيشه نحن اليوم في لبنان ما يتعلق بكيفية تعاطي أو مقاربة المادة 51 من ميثاق الأمم المتحدة. حصل نقاش حقيقي خلال العدوان الإسرائيلي الأخير على لبنان. في ذاك الوقت عند البحث في اتفاق وقف الأعمال العدائية كان هناك موقف واضح من قبل المفاوض اللبناني بأن حق الدفاع عن النفس يجب أن لا يتجاوز قواعد القانون الدولي. نص وروح المادة الواردة في ميثاق الأمم المتحدة قد اختزلتها إسرائيل ومن يرعى إسرائيل بالدفع باتجاه التحول من الشرعية الجماعية إلى التصرف الأحادي من قبل دولة تحت عنوان الدفاع عن النفس بحجة الدفاع الوقائي أو الدفاع الفردي. تم اختزال كل المنظومة القانون الدولي، تحديدا ما يتعلق بإقدام العدو الإسرائيلي على ممارسة اعتداءات يومية تحت ذريعة أنه يدافع عن نفسه بحجة وجود أو نية القيام بعمل إرهابي ما. هذا الأمر هو أخطر ما يمكن أن يواجه اليوم عالمنا، حيث تم اختزال كل مفهوم القانون الدولي والشرعية الدولية وتسخيره، الانتقال من هذا الفهم أو التصرف الجماعي إلى التصرف الأحادي من قبل الدول على قاعدة استغلال موازين القوى، تماما كما حصل مع إيران. اليوم عند العدوان على إيران، عند الهجوم على إيران، كان هناك كما عبر صباحا معالي وزير الخارجية، كان هناك ضرب للقانون الدولي وضرب للمسار الدبلوماسي، ليس فقط اعتداء مباشر على إيران، تماما كما يحصل اليوم بالنسبة لنا على مستوى لبنان. كل اعتداء تقوم به إسرائيل اليوم على لبنان أو قامت به إنما هو ضرب للشرعية الدولية، للقانون الدولي، لنص المادة 51 من ميثاق الأمم المتحدة. نفس الأمر اليوم يعكس نفسه على مستوى آخر أيضا، هذا التحول من الإدارة الجماعية إلى التحول إلى الممارسات الفردية للدول، ما يحصل على مستوى العقوبات مثلا. هذا الأمر تعاني منه إيران اليوم، هذا اعتداء وإن كان لم يكن وليس مباشرا بالمعنى العسكري أو الأمني، لكنه هو استخدام السلاح الاقتصادي في محاولة لإخضاع الدول. هذا الأمر أيضا يترافق مع إضعاف لكل المؤسسات الجماعية، إضعاف لكل المؤسسات التي ترعى القانون الدولي، ما يتعلق بالوكالة كما تحدثنا كما تحدث زميلي قبل قليل، وكما يحصل في كل الملفات التي تهم اليوم استقرار عالمنا. التهديدات اليوم التي تطلق باتجاه دول في أمريكا اللاتينية تحت عناوين كبح عدوان مفترض أو تهديد مفترض للسلم الأهلي، هذا الأمر إنما يشكل تجاوزا وخرقا وكسرا لكل القواعد والقوانين الدولية. نحن اليوم على مستوى لبنان ونحن نواجه هذه المعضلة، نلتقي أيضا مع إيران بأن التحدي هو تحدي مشترك، كيفية إعادة الدول إلى مسار الالتزام بالقانون الدولي. اليوم نأمل أن يمارس كل أشكال الضغط من قبل المؤسسات الإقليمية والمؤسسات الدولية من أجل وضع حد لهذه العدوانية. لا أعتقد أن اليوم منطق الاستفراد الذي يواجهه أو تواجهه دولة من الدول يجب أن لا يشعر المؤسسات الأخرى أو الدول الأخرى بأنها في عين التحدي. علينا اليوم إعادة الروح إلى منظومة العلاقات الدولية بناء على منطوق ونص القانون الدولي، ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، أن نعيد المرجعية المعيارية الفعلية للمادة الثانية من ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، وأن يكون هناك تفسير دقيق لكيفية استخدام المادة 51 واستغلالها من قبل بعض الدول لتبرير اعتداءاتها على دول أخرى.
Thank you, Dr. Khalil. In fact, these are very important issues among those common concerns and common threats for the whole region. Dr. Abbood, Iraq as a neighboring country to Iran has been suffering even during this recent aggression against Iran. Despite all warnings by the Iraqi government, the space of Iraq was used for this aggression. No translation? Yes? And Iraqi space was used for this aggression, and the sovereignty of Iraq was violated several times during the war. I want to know, I think it would be interesting even for the audience to know how this war and this aggression was perceived inside Iraq. And what were the implications of this for the Iraqi government and Iraqi people?
نعم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. في البداية أتقدم بجزيل الشكر والامتنان إلى وزارة الخارجية الإيرانية وإلى كل القائمين على هذا المؤتمر المهم جدا لدعوتنا المشاركة فيه. أما فيما يخص سؤالك سيدي الكريم، الحكومة العراقية أدانت وبقوة الاعتداء الإسرائيلي على الجمهورية الإيرانية الإسلامية، ويعد هذا الاعتداء هو خرقا للقوانين الدولية وخرقا للميثاق الدولي للأمم المتحدة، وخصوصا توقيت الاعتداء أثناء المفاوضات الدبلوماسية. هذا يعد بذاته هو تصعيد متعمد من قبل دول الكيان الصهيوني ومن قبل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. حقيقة الخطر هو ليس يهدد جمهورية إيران فقط، وإنما هو خطر إقليمي، وإذا استمر هذا الصمت من قبل الأمم المتحدة وعدم الردع للولايات المتحدة ستستمر بالاعتداءات على دول أخرى. فيجب أن تتخذ دورها الحقيقي الأمم المتحدة وتطبيق بنود ميثاقها على جميع الدول لكي لا يتم اعتداء من أي دولة على أي دولة أخرى. أصدرت بيانا الحكومة العراقية بمنع وعدم السماح لأي دولة باستخدام الأجواء العراقية والأراضي العراقية للاعتداء على أي دولة من دول الجوار، وسيتم اتخاذ كافة الإجراءات القانونية بحق الدول التي ستخترق الأجواء أو الأراضي العراقية للاعتداء على أي دولة من دول الجوار. حقيقة الاعتداء الذي جرى على جمهورية إيران الإسلامية ليس لديه أي مبرر. إن كان من دواعي الدفاع عن النفس فإيران لم تقوم بهجوم على إسرائيل ولا على أمريكا حتى تدافع عن نفسها إسرائيل، وإن كان من دواعي الهجوم الوقائي فإيران أيضا ليس هناك أي مبررات أنه أي تهديد مباشر من قبل جمهورية إيران الإسلامية لدول الكيان الصهيوني أو الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. إن دل على شيء هذا الاعتداء فيدل على هيمنة أو إرادة الولايات المتحدة للهيمنة على الشرق الأوسط. ومن ونقطة أخرى يعني بث رسالة لحلفائها في المنطقة أنه هم باستطاعتهم في أي وقت اختراق القوانين الدولية دون رادع، لأنه حقيقة ما نشاهده الآن هو ازدواجية في تطبيق القوانين الدولية. فتطبق القوانين الدولية مرة بصالح الدول اللي لصالح مصالحها الشخصية طبعا، فكيف ما تخدم مصالحها تطبق هذه القوانين. فعلى الأمم المتحدة أن تردع كل الاعتداءات التي ليس لديها أي مبرر قانوني، وتأخذ دورها الحقيقي للحفاظ على السلم الدولي، وأيضا على الشعوب المنطقة كافة أن يخرجوا للمظاهرات التنديد بالاعتداءات، وأن المجتمع الدولي أن يطالب بزيادة تمثيل دول الجنوب داخل مجلس الأمن، لأنه هذه الدول اللي هي تمثل في دول دول آسيا وأفريقيا وأمريكا اللاتينية أن يكون تمثيلها بصورة أكبر في مجلس الأمن الدولي، لأن هذه الدول هي المتضررة بالاعتداءات التي تقوم بها الولايات المتحدة وحلفائها.
Thank you, Dr. Abbood. Professor Hadian, coming to you, you have been working for so many years on the evolving global order. But during last few years, we are witnessing so many weird developments in this field, undermining global and regional order. The whole international law is violated by the very founders and protectors of the international law and rules-based international order. In regional level, we are witnessing an actor with an all-out impunity and free hand. No one is safe. And that actor is supported unconditionally by those international powers. What are the prospects of these developments? You know, how do you see the evolving world order in this very weird situation?
Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me a chance to share my views with you. You know, I'm not a legal expert, and I'm coming from a school of thought which believe basically law, rights are very secondary to power. Basically, this is the power in reality which would help to articulate norms, laws, rules, to regulate the behavior of the actors. Thus, to me, basically, the arrangements of power, the structure and nature of power are far more crucial than the norms or the laws or the rules. The way I see the international order is, first of all, as realists would argue, world politics, international politics, is the politics of great powers. We have four great powers: Russia, China, US, and Europe. Two of them are somewhat declining power: Europe and Russia. We have only one global power, and that's US. And that's to a large extent because of its navy. Bases, military bases are important. Dollar is important. Somehow the norms of freedom of expression, democracy, so forth and so on are important too. But Navy, to me, is the most important element of this global power. Just look at the Venezuela now. Geographically, they are far away from one another. But still, they sent the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier there, which has so many planes, which would only the planes, the fighters, in this one aircraft carrier can overweight the entire air power of Venezuela. So that's why America is the only global power. China is the rising power, but still is a regional power. Takes time to be able to match the American power. Economically, militarily, technologically, so it would take some time. Certainly they try to make a coalition with one another. China's potential allies are Russia, Pakistan, Iran. Of course, there are other countries like North Korea, some of the smaller countries, which would basically make a coalition with the China as a pole. And the US has its own bases, has its own allies too, like Western Europe, like Japan, Australia, so forth and so on. But in order to have a bipolar system, to me, that would take at least 20 years. At least. So that's the way I would see the international order for the next 20 years. Thus, if we are going to make recommendation for the countries, we have to consider this power structure. With this in mind, we have to say, what should our government do if we are going to have a sound policy in dealing with not only the region but internationally. If I have time, I would like to address a little bit of the region, but if not, so I'll wait for the next round of
It will be
questions.
my next question to you. Of course, we will talk about the role of Global South and regional actors as well. But coming back to you, Mohammad, you talked about the dangerous precedent and pattern created by this aggression. Here, I want to pinpoint some very important concepts. Framing and disinformation campaign, which can lead to a kind of misperceptions and misassessment what exactly led to the previous aggression against Iran, misperception of a weak Iran. I believe that any misperception and misassessment of the results of the previous war can lead to resumption of another war in the region, and this time I think it would be, if it happens, it would be much more tense and much more harsh because Iran will not be measured anymore this time if it happens again. But as a person who has been working in this field, I see still those disinformation campaigns going on in the West. Of course, I don't believe in collective West anymore, but it is happening in different European countries and in the US as well. How do you see the consequences of those misperceptions and misassessments coming from those disinformation campaigns?
Thank you very much. So I think here we need to distinguish on the one hand between how governments take decisions, what intelligence do they rely on, what sources they have access to, and then what are the motivations that underpin any decisions they make on the one hand. And then there is the question of how do they justify that to members of the public in the West, because obviously calling themselves democracies, they need to act in a democratic way, and there has to be some justification. Let me deal with the second point first. So to justify something today, we have social media, we have newspapers, we have print, we have broadcast media. And whoever briefs them, whoever controls that narrative, largely decides whether or not the populace is going to believe what is being told or not. Now, when the Iran-Israel-US war happened, we commissioned, and this is just last week, a report in the United Kingdom, which covered 60 pages altogether, for how the UK press treated this question of who was right, who was wrong, who was the victim, who was the aggressor, who was acting irresponsibly, who was acting responsibly. When you read the report, it is absolutely shocking to see how the populace in the United Kingdom was convinced that in this war, Israel and US were really acting in self-defense rather than provoking a war with Iran. That Iran was acting irresponsibly, Iran was targeting civilians, Iran was targeting humanitarian hospitals. When you assess the actual facts on the ground, and we have done this in a detailed fashion, you realize that the briefing that was put forward to the UK media was absolutely fake, had no basis to it, but that is what it took in a democracy to sell the notion. Then we come to my first point, which is I think that whenever you look at intelligence, largely the intelligence organizations are far more sanguine, are far more mature, and all the intelligence that was received by people in positions of power in the Western capitals was that there was no imminent strike from Iran ever going to happen attacking Western assets, that Iran had no plans to initiate any military attempts against anyone in the region. This was the actual intelligence. But the people who are in a position of power obviously had their own motivation, which was politically driven and which was largely influenced by lobbies both in the Western capitals, United States, etc. And so the motivation in a way contradicted what their own intelligence findings are. So in this age, in this day and age, when you have fake news that is used to justify actions, and when you are not prepared to listen to your intellectuals, to your intelligence people that have information which is very, very important and on which decisions in the past were based, and you are acting capriciously, then I think we are living in a world where we just have to accept that might is right, it's my way or the highway, and in the case of the United States, it's United States first, and now United States alone.
Thank you, Mohammad. Please. Dr. Hadian, you were talking about the role of Global South and regional actors. If possible, please let us know what you think about the role the Global South and regional actors play in maybe reviving the role of international law and rules-based international order, maybe as actors who can play a more vital role in bringing the world to a state of stability and security again.
Thank you. I wish to address this question at two levels. One is that at the real level, at the factual level, and the other one is in terms of norms and laws and what Global South can do and the regional actors can do in enhancing them. To me, unfortunately, West has lost its legitimacy as a torchbearer of these rules, norms, and laws. And President Trump, in fact, hardly referred to these concepts anymore. You don't see he ever referred to international law, to international humanitarian law, to any of these, democracy, freedom, so forth and so on. You don't see him to refer to these concepts. But still, let's not forget, these are all, these ideas were articulated principally by West, and these are good ideas. No matter that they showed in this particularly war with Palestinians that none of these were important and significant enough for them to take any action. It took them more than 3 months, in fact, even to condemn the violation of these norms and laws. But absolute majority of them did not take any action. Any action. The simplest one of calling the ambassadors to the foreign ministries, Israeli ambassador, to the foreign ministries and issuing some sort of a dissatisfaction with what they are doing. But what I would like to emphasize is, it doesn't mean that if they adopted a double standard policy, that these are bad ideas. So these are good ideas, but what we need to do is to change the torchbearer. Some other countries, some other institutions, arguably alternative to the current one, should take the responsibility to support these ideas. We should not say that because of that double standard, we should get rid of these rules and norms and laws. Majority of them are good ones. And they are byproduct, and they are product of humanity. Thus, we should support them, but we should say to the West, you no longer have the moral authority to be the torchbearer. You showed that you didn't act responsibly when it happened. Just right in front of our eyes. And I have to thank Al Jazeera. I would like to single out Al Jazeera. Thanks to the Al Jazeera, it brought to the attention of the world community that how the hunger is being weaponized, how the children are being killed, and how the women are being killed. And we are saying, okay, these are collateral. And still there are people in the West are arguing, was it a genocide? Should we call it a genocide or not? Still they're debating about that. Just imagine if another country would have done it. 1/10 of it. How they would have reacted. But now, unfortunately, that's the case. So, I think Global South has a responsibility, and there are countries in the Global South who can legitimately be torchbearer of these very good norms and laws.
Thank you. Dr. Abbood, talking about the importance of the region, you know, Iran has been pursuing the neighborhood policy for years now and has been trying to promote a solid, strong region. Right now, after this new wave of aggression in the region, so many people are talking about collective security, even some talking about collective defense as a possibility for the future of the region. Do you see any possibility of materializing this ideal in the future, at least from Iraqi point of view?
نعم. طبعا الحكومة العراقية دعت إلى إجراء مفاوضات دبلوماسية إلى الحلول السلمية دعت إلى استخدام الحلول السلمية من خلال المفاوضات الدبلوماسية والوساطات الدبلوماسية بين الدول. طبعا الدفع ضد بالاعتداءات والعنف هو لا يحبذ من قبل الحكومة العراقية ولا دول الجوار. نسعى دائما لحلحلة الأمور بحلول سلمية لحفظ الأمن والسلام في المنطقة، وأيضا الجمهورية الإسلامية وحكومتها لا تدعو إلى استخدام العنف لحل المشكلات الدولية، وهي أيضا تدعو إلى استخدام المفاوضات الدبلوماسية لحل هذه الأزمات. لكن الخروقات اللي تتخذها الولايات المتحدة للقانون الدولي ولميثاق الأمم المتحدة إذا استمر سيدفع بالدول باتجاهات أخرى، سيدفع إلى تحالفات جديدة، إلى توسع العمليات الحربية في المنطقة، وهذا لا يحبذ من قبل جميع دول المنطقة.
Thank you very much. To be brief, Eldar, talking about Europe's role, Europe has been playing a very important role during last 20 years in the file of Iran's nuclear program. But now we see a very high outrage, serious outrage inside Iran for the role Europe played during the war and after the war for unconditional support of the aggressor. For years they have been talking about rules-based international order. Now they explicitly say that interest and security concerns preponderate rules, norms, and law. But still, there are some people who believe Europe can play a role of a mediator or a facilitator at least in the upcoming negotiations. So do you see any role for future diplomacy, possible diplomacy in this file?
Well, frankly speaking, I'm very skeptical about any potentially positive role that E3 could play in the future diplomacy with Iran, given what happened this year. And as someone who's been working on the EU policy on Iran for more than 15 years, I can see a clear and very dramatic shift that has happened in the past few years. If in mid-10s, let's say, Iran was always seen as a challenge, as a problem, but a problem that can be managed and can be dealt with, including through diplomacy, not only pressure and sanctions. And that has led to JCPOA with important role that Europe and then High Representative of European Union for Foreign Policy, Federica Mogherini, played in that process. Now, what we've seen in the last years is the shift to treating Iran as part of some sort of axis of evil, which also comprises Russia, China, and North Korea. So more and more this thinking pervades the thinking of foreign ministries in E3 countries. I'm not saying about all European countries, there are some nuances here and there, but if we're talking about E3, then I think it's safe to say that this is the prevailing thinking right now. So we're entering in an era when Europe, in its quest to redefine itself as a geopolitical player, is entering into this bloc style of thinking. There is a bloc of democracies embodied by Europe itself, a few other Western nations, and there is a bloc of autocracies of those 4 countries that I mentioned that have to be fought. And what is particularly remarkable is that when I worked on Iran and Persian Gulf countries in mid-2010s, it was the Europeans who insisted that even though Iran is a problem, but it's a problem that has to be managed within the regional framework with other nations like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and so on. And then the resistance to that narrative came from the Gulf countries, those who had a difficult relationship with Iran at that time. In all our diplomatic interactions, we Europeans were scolded as being naive for reaching out to Tehran and so on. But now we see the exact opposite is happening. It's the Gulf countries, those who used to have turbulent relationship with Iran, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others. Those are the ones who are telling the Europeans that Iran has to somehow be brought into regional discussions, and that Iran's interests should also be taken into account for the sake of regional stability. So, answering your question briefly, unfortunately, I do not see any particularly important role for E3 nations to play in the future diplomacy with Iran. I think that's mostly up to the regional countries now.
Thank you, Eldar. We talked, Dr. Baghaie, we talked about world politics, the dichotomy of rules-based, law-based, or even force-based international order, and the role the great powers are playing now. Right now, most of them are among the revisionist states in the world. In such a world, very complex situation in this world, how do you see the future of this world politics? What is the role of diplomacy here? As a career diplomat, you have been experiencing for so many years trying to find some path for diplomacy. Do you see any role for diplomacy as diplomacy was betrayed in the beginning, you said? So what will be the future of the world politics in this very complex situation?
Now, basically, I cannot foretell what will happen, but one thing is for sure is that diplomacy never ends, should never end. I think diplomacy stops where dictation starts. And that's the reason why right now we are facing such a deadlock in our negotiation with the United States and the other parties. I do not believe that law is inferior to power. If we regard law to be inferior, it would mean that we are, in a way, endorsing the rule-based international order. Rule-based international order is the one that has been propagated for the past 1 decade at least, and now we are at the height of such order that has no regard for the rule of law, for the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter. Law has been established, has been codified to tame the power, to limit the powerful people, to limit the extent they can exercise their power against other countries. And I think if we regard diplomacy, the essence of diplomacy as to be cooperation and compromise, we need to avoid the sense of self-entitlement that entitles you to have everything and not to give any regard for the interest or for the concern of your interlocutors. Again, that's where we are. For us, diplomacy is not a PR rhetorics. Diplomacy is an instrument of settling disputes, an instrument of maximizing your cooperation with other states. And I think basically that was the experience, that was the result of fighting between countries, between humanities, that resulted in the United Nations Charter in 1945. So we need to appreciate the achievements of human civilization, which we should not underestimate it. We should in our diplomatic toolbox to make sure that justice and international peace and security are preserved for the sake of humanity. As long as certain powers think that they have every right to only pursue their own egoistic self-interest, I think it would be a recipe for more violence and tension at the world level. Thank you.
Thank you. We are about to conclude, but before conclusion, I can give each of our panelists 1 minute if you have any reflection or you have anything to add at the end of this. Each panelist only 1 minute. Please be brief, but if you have any reflection, please. Dr. Hadian.
Okay, I just would like to make an exception. When I said European, of course, Ireland, Spain, Norway, they all played a very positive role, and I would like to make that distinction between the way they acted with many others in the European capitals. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Abbood, any final point?
تمام شكرا. أنا من هذا المنبر أدعو جميع الجهات المعنية لعقد هكذا مؤتمرات ورفع توصياتها إلى المجلس الأمن الدولي والأمم المتحدة لأخذ دورها الحقيقي، لأن حقيقة الاعتداءات لا يستهان بها والمنطقة تمر بخطر كبير جدا. فعلى الجامعات والمؤسسات الحكومية جميعا عقد هذه المؤتمرات ورفع توصياتها بصورة مستمرة، وأيضا أوجه دعوة لكافة الشعوب في المنطقة للخروج للتنديد بكل الاعتداءات على دول المنطقة، لأنه لو استمرت الولايات المتحدة وحلفائها في هذه الاعتداءات دون رادع ستمر المنطقة بحرب عالمية كبرى.
Thank you. Eldar.
Well, my main takeaway so far from what I've heard here is that despite the war in June, there is still chance for diplomacy to succeed. And for that to happen, it's incumbent on all players, and especially those who broke the negotiations, to accept the realistic premises, to forego the notion that somehow they can impose their will and to get Iran to capitulate to the maximalist demands, and to engage in good faith diplomatic dialogue, which is the only way to resolve the conflict and to avoid repetition of the aggression that we've seen in June.
Thank you. Mohammad.
So I have two very quick points. I would like to build on the messaging from my brother here on the left, which is that I think that we are seeing now for the first time a split between the Europeans and the US. The split has started, and it is only going to get more pronounced as the US is more inwards, and the US is going to be looking at what it means for the US and US alone. And in this case, the EU and widely the Europeans will have to come to a view. Do they want to be the tail that follows the dog, or do they want to now assume their own policies? And this will also call into question the future of NATO. Will NATO survive in the form that it is today, or it will not? And then my final point is that we are seeing the start of a new world order in which we will see multipolarity rather than unipolarity. And in this, there will be a lot of chaos in the next 5-10 years, but then we will settle down, hopefully, to business as usual.
Thank you. Dr. Baghaie.
I think we have every reason to be alarmed that if the current trend remains unchecked, we may face the return to pre-Brian Clock Pact 1928, where war was not outlawed and even territorial conquest by force was somehow legitimate. You show me one more example of an actor occupying the lands of two countries, Lebanon and Syria. This is happening right now in our region. Show me one case of genocide that is taking place before our very eyes, and the ICC and ICJ are handcuffed. They are being punished, they are being threatened to pursue justice. And I think if we have learned one lesson from the previous world experiences, being League of Nations and its failure, is that appeasement, being out of fear or out of opportunism, would be detrimental for the whole system. And if I may finish my statement, my point, with one more alarming point, is that inaction and indifference are poisonous for the whole life of humanity. What we have been seeing for the past 2 years is absolute impunity given to the Israeli regime for the horrible genocide it has been committing. And inaction, that is the product or byproduct of indifference, is the main problem right now the humanity is facing. Yes, we are seeing widespread protest in the streets of many countries, but when it comes to action, the action must be done by the governments. And here, the governments, many of them even in our region, are unfortunately normalizing the atrocity. And by remaining inactive or indifference towards these atrocities, we are inviting for more. So that's why each and every one of us should shoulder our responsibility, because even if we talk in terms of law, every country under international humanitarian law, under 1949 Convention, are obligated to respect and ensure respect international law. We are also under an obligation under 1948 Genocide Convention to prevent and punish genocide. So, as you see, by law or logic, by both law and logic and ethics, each and every member states in the international community, plus every citizens, are obliged to stop being indifferent, because at the end of the day, it is our collective destiny that is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I assume you agree that we had a very prolific discussion with so many insightful thoughts and points made by our excellent panelists. I thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please join me applauding our panelists. And with this, we will be heading for lunch. You will be guided by our colleagues outside. After lunch, we will restart again at 2:30. Thank you so much.